South Africa is on the waiting list for the COVID-19 vaccine, but it could take up to 6 months before it is delivered. The South African Medical Research Council's Safura Abdul Karim explains why it's taking so long and who'll get the jab first.
There's several parts to procuring a vaccine, and I think the fact that we're using a mechanism like COVAX, which is a consortium, a group of countries that have come together that are deciding to pool their resources to purchase a vaccine, makes things all the more complicated, because this is not the South African government going to a Pfizer or going to a Merck and saying, yes, we'd like to purchase X amount of vaccines from you, please deliver them. We are relying on the allocation in this group. So COVAX, as an advanced market commitment, has to decide what types of vaccines it's procuring, how it's going to deliver those things, and then it's actually got to get to the business of delivering the vaccines within each of the almost 175 countries that are members of COVAX. So that's the first component of it. And COVAX hasn't quite decided, to the best of my knowledge, which vaccine it's going to procure. The second issue is we need to decide which vaccines we are willing to take. So, for example, normally one would wait for a full approval of a vaccine before procuring it. However, we know that the Pfizer vaccine has received what's called an emergency use approval, which means that it's got sort of a lighter approval, not a full approval. Now, normally, COVAX would have wanted a full approval before distributing that vaccine, but it has allowed each country to choose whether or not it will take a vaccine that has received an emergency use approval. So that's an additional component, which is we need to make a decision about which vaccines we want to receive. And that question is not just about which one we like, it's about which one is feasible when rolled out in South Africa. And so you can see it's quite complicated. It's not just a matter of saying, yes, I'd like a vaccine. There's a whole system that needs to happen that moves with it, and not all of it is within the South African government's control.
Well, for the latest on where South Africa is in acquiring the vaccine, I'm joined by Deputy Director General for Health, the Anban Pillay. He joins us via Zoom. Thanks for your time, sir. We appreciate it. So the president on Monday telling the country that we will get a vaccine in the second quarter. South Africans are asking, why so long?
So we participated in the COVAX initiative, which you were reporting on earlier. And that initiative allocates vaccines as they become available from the manufacturers of the vaccine. What has happened, and your viewers may be particularly concerned with the fact that there are other countries that have already started rolling out the vaccine. Many of these countries didn't participate in the COVAX facility, but rather got into bilateral agreements with a particular vaccine manufacturer. In this case, Pfizer, the Pfizer vaccine is the one that they had put their money on as such, and it came through for them, and that's why they've been able to roll out their vaccines first. COVAX, on the other hand, took the approach of spreading its risk amongst a number of vaccine producers, because at the time when these trials started, there was no sense of which vaccine was going to succeed and which was going to fail. And so COVAX engaged with all of the vaccine producers. Based on that, the COVAX will receive an allocation. They've indicated to us, expect allocation in Q2. Their soft allocation to us appears to be in the earlier parts of Q2. So I'm hoping that sometime in April we would be able to get the full COVAX supply. But in addition to that, I think it's important to say that we're pursuing the bilateral agreements, as we have been from last year, to try and get the additional supplies through these same manufacturers. Yeah. Obviously, they've tied up many of their production to these larger economies, where they obviously are garnering a much higher price. And so South Africa is being considered, but at this stage we can't confirm anything firm, as the President indicated, of exactly when we can get earlier doses before April. But we're certainly trying our best to persuade each company to give us a small amount, especially for our healthcare workers who are in the front line of this.
So did we play our cards wrong when it comes to actually securing a vaccine? Was COVAX the right move then?
Well, I mean, hindsight is a perfect science, Shahan. The choice we had earlier in 2020 was to say, well, you could either go with putting your money into Pfizer or AstraZeneca, because all of these companies that were developing the vaccine required that you pay up front and you would be paying upfront for only one specific vaccine, so whether it was Pfizer, AstraZeneca, J&J, or any of the others. So if we went with one single company and that vaccine failed to succeed in the trials, we would then have basically lost our space in the queue with all the other companies. So our approach was rather spread our risk across all of the companies. And COVAX was the facility that allowed us to do that because it basically engaged with each of those companies and got into agreements with them about the supply. Because if you went with one company, let's assume you went with Pfizer and Pfizer's vaccine failed, we'll be sitting today telling you we don't know when we're going to get vaccine because we would have even missed the COVAX arrangement as well. So I think it's important to understand what we were faced with at that point in time.
Yeah. So let's talk about AstraZeneca then, because that, of course, was trialed in South Africa by Wits University. They suggest now that it's one of the best options for South Africa, given the temperature it needs to be stored in. Are you consulting with AstraZeneca?
Yes, we've been consulting with AstraZeneca from last year as well, trying to get them to allocate to us a portion of vaccine as early as possible. AstraZeneca at the time could not make any firm commitments to us around supply because they've taken a bit of a different route from many of the other companies in that they have multiple producers and suppliers into different regions of the world. What I can say is they've now come back to us with some clearer sense about how supply would happen, and they're trying to support us to get some early access to vaccines through one of their producers. This is not confirmed yet, but I think this is one of the key areas that we are pursuing to try and get early access to vaccines for our healthcare workers.
So here's the problem, though. I get the logistics around this and why South Africa went the COVAX route, but the reality is we have hundreds of people dying every day from the coronavirus in this country. In the US and other parts of the world, including Israel, Mexico, for example, they're all rolling out this vaccine to their citizens. And South Africans sitting watching at home are saying, but why is our government taking so long? Why are we not pushing harder to get this vaccine here faster? April next year is a long time away.
Yeah, no, I hear what you say, but I think it's difficult for people to appreciate maybe sitting in their homes, not having a sense of what we're trying to do on our side to try and get access to vaccines. I think what needs to be understood is that every country in the world wants to have access to these vaccines. The vaccine that was registered prior to yesterday was only the Pfizer vaccine. And now it's the AstraZeneca vaccine, which the UK government only registered yesterday. So there are no other vaccines. And to also understand that many of the other vaccines that are not available yet, but the suppliers have not placed dossiers with our regulatory authority. So those steps have to be satisfied before we can release a vaccine that's safe and effective. The worst thing we can do is say people have access to a vaccine, but we don't know how safe or effective it is. We must be clear that this vaccine is safe and effective. So that requires time, unfortunately. The UK only registered the AstraZeneca vaccine yesterday.
Yeah, but they've been rolling out the other vaccines for some time now. So that's what people are talking about.
The Pfizer vaccine, yes.
Yeah.
The Pfizer vaccine.
So why are we not approaching Pfizer and AstraZeneca to a point where it's with a sense of urgency so we don't have to wait for COVAX, which is clearly going to take some time?
Okay, so maybe I didn't make myself clear before, Shahan. What I'm saying is we've pursued all of the vaccine manufacturers that have vaccines that are close to ready for production, including Pfizer. Pfizer has indicated at this stage, we do not have stock to supply to you immediately. Those countries that have had access to stock have been in bilateral agreements with Pfizer. As I indicated, we didn't get into a bilateral agreement because we pursued the COVAX route. COVAX does have a bilateral agreement with Pfizer, but Pfizer is supplying COVAX at a later stage after satisfying some of its other commitments. And that's a decision the company takes. And like us, many other countries are also complaining with each of the companies to say, we'd like to have some stock of the vaccine. And they say, well, we'll see what we can do to help you. But at this stage, everybody wants vaccine and our production capacity is fairly limited. So you would have to wait.
Yeah. AstraZeneca, let's talk about that a bit more, right? Because South Africans were used as so-called guinea pigs in this trial. Before this was even allowed by our government in the country, why was a deal not made there to say, if it is successful, that we need some sort of preference?
I don't know. I've heard some of the so-called experts on eNCA suggest that this is what government must do. That's a very strange approach, because when a clinical trial is done in a country, the company that's doing the trial doesn't seek approval from government. They seek approval from the regulator on a scientific basis.
Yes, but these are special circumstances, right? It's COVID-19 that's killing millions around the world.
No, I agree with you that the company should consider that they did the trial in South Africa and the data from South African patients contributed to the success of their product. We have raised this with them. In saying so, the point I'm making is that you cannot say to a company, because you because you did a trial in South Africa, you now have to give us a vaccine. There is no law like that. No country has such a law. Many drugs have been trialed in South Africa and they are not registered in the country simply because companies may choose not to do so. There is no legislation anywhere in the world that I'm aware of that you can force a company to say, if you did a trial in my country, please give us the drug now. It doesn't happen like that. And I'm not sure where people get this idea from.
Well, also, these are not so-called experts. These are experts in these fields, vaccinologists who are holding these trials. But let me talk to you about what Pfizer said to us today, and this is why I'm questioning whether or not you're acting with urgency around the talks with them. Pfizer said, and I quote, "The South African government says the Pfizer vaccine won't be suitable for South Africa because of storage requirements." That's a response, basically, saying that you need to get your act together in securing this vaccine. So what's the problem?
So the point you're asking me about is whether the Pfizer vaccine will be used as a national rollout. So the Pfizer vaccine was presented to the Ministerial Advisory Committee at an earlier point last year. At that point, Pfizer indicated quite clearly to us the vaccine has to be stored at minus 70 degrees. South Africa has only 2 storage facilities that are able to store at minus 70 degrees in the bulk required in order to distribute the vaccine. It became clear to the Ministerial Advisory Committee and us that if you want to have a national rollout of millions of people, you cannot operate off that. So the Pfizer vaccine will not be your best choice. So we indicated to Pfizer it's going to be very difficult to do this. Many other countries have also done so. However, in the context of accessing vaccine for our healthcare workers, we went back to Pfizer to say, would you be able to assist us with small volumes of vaccine that we can manage through these facilities for our healthcare workers, which is a very different vaccination program? They've indicated, yes, we'll consider that, but we can only come back to you hopefully in March, but we can give you no firm commitment on that. So we're still awaiting a firm commitment from them as to when exactly they'll be able to give us that stock.
Just in terms of COVAX as well, we've missed deadlines, and that, of course, has led to many people saying government's not serious about actually securing this vaccine, and that only covers 10% of our population. It's a mess. There is a good, strong sentiment out there that government has not adequately tried to get a vaccine to South Africa faster than April. It looks like you've basically settled for April for a vaccine, and by then, thousands more would have died.
Well, I don't know why you have that view, because you're not sitting on my side in my chair looking every day at what we're trying to do to access vaccines. Your perception is driven by other factors, which I don't really understand. But let me say to you that we are
No, actually, it's driven by facts. You missed both deadlines for COVAX.
But you have no facts about who we've met with and how many meetings we've had and how we've tried to access vaccines. Are you sitting in the meetings with me with the pharma companies? You're not. So you're speculating about what you think is happening.
No, I'm not speculating.
And you're making judgments based on that.
I am talking about government missing 2 deadlines for COVAX, which is your only real option.
The deadline is with you, not with COVAX. COVAX has said to us, we understand that South Africa will be part of COVAX. You'll be part of the initial allocation. You have not missed any deadline. If Shahan Ramkissoon decides that we've missed a deadline, I can't help you because COVAX hasn't made that decision. You have.
So what is the way forward? Are you accepting April? Or as you say, behind the scenes, you're trying really hard to get the vaccine before that?
It seems you're not understanding me. I said to you, we are pursuing all of the vaccine manufacturers to get access to vaccines before April. I cannot tell you a date on when those vaccines will be available because they have not given us a date. Because if I give you a date today, you'll come back to me and say, well, I misled you. So we do not want to do that. We want to make sure that a company says to us, we're giving you X volume of vaccine on this date. Then we'll make it public that we're sure we're going to get this delivery by this date. We're trying to pursue for vaccines even next week if somebody can give us vaccines. But nobody has stock, so we're not able to get it.
And the action plan in terms of rolling out that vaccine when we eventually get it, we know it'll go to healthcare workers. What next?
Yes. After healthcare workers, we would pursue each of the vulnerable groups, the over 70s, 75, those with comorbidities, etc. The Ministerial Advisory Committee has come up with a priority list, very much aligned with what the World Health Organization has set up in terms of what priority groups are appropriate, given the morbidity and mortality that COVID presents to many patients.
All right, we can leave it right there. Deputy Director General of the Department of Health, Anban Pillay. We'll have